In our lifetime, one of the most crucial assets we can acquire is money. For some people, getting cash means buying a new video game or going out to eat. For others, a few bills can be the difference between life and death. This merit increases when you have someone else that you need to take care of. The constant struggle for these necessary funds can sometimes wear us down to the point of desperation. If we lack money, then our personal worth gets called into question. Losing that self-respect, it can be very easy to turn our backs to society. Dark thoughts begin to emerge, making us wonder if it's even worth trying anymore. Is the fight for survival too much to handle? Will our value ever be realized? Is there really anything worthwhile to strive for? Welcome to Life is Money. Life is Money is a 3-volume miniseries that was originally published from 2011 to 2012. Made as a dual effort between writer Teru Asaniji and artist Teka Yagaraba, the end result was a death game scenario that gets surprisingly personal at times. With nihilism being a core theme, deteriorating mental health nearly makes appreciating the reward for winning impossible. Regardless, everyone needs money for something, and the beginning of the story shows just how true this is. Entering a busy nightclub, we find our main character, Meguro Fukuro Koji. Drowning his sorrows in alcohol, the man is desperate to forget his troubles. Being refused another drink by the bartender, a nearby customer slides his over, helping Meguro calm down a bit. The two get to talking, leading Meguro to bring up the issue hanging over his head. His little sister Mawaru has been dealing with heart disease for a while now, forcing the man to work labor jobs in order to keep up with expenses. Miraculously, a charity group found out about the situation, pitching in to raise the money needed for her surgery. Managing to gather 100 million yen, things started looking up for the first time. Unfortunately, the group vanished immediately after, taking the money with them. Being lambasted by the public for losing the funds, Meguro lost any future means of fundraising. Back to square one, Meguro is willing to do anything for the chance to save his sister. Stepping outside, the shady man suggests a riskier method for collecting the cash he needs. Bringing up an event known as the Nightmare Game, Meguro is presented with another way of getting 100 million yen instantly. However, rather than gambling with money, the bet would be far more dangerous. While hesitant at first, Meguru's resolve wavers as he's forced to acknowledge his grim situation. Given some time to deliver an answer, the desperate man is handed a business card for later use. Looking over Torameshi Tetsuo's contact info, Meguro refuses to join such a reckless game. He confidently goes back to work, knowing that his efforts eventually have to be rewarded. Putting a damper on the man's determination, his workplace receives a phone call, reporting some very bad news. Rushing back to the hospital, Mawaru's doctor claims that there isn't much time left to save her. Asking about the transplant, Meguro is told that success is still possible, but only if they act fast. Reaching into his pocket, the man pulls out the business card he couldn't bring himself to throw away. Within a short period, the two men meet up again. Having already dedicated his life to taking care of his sister, Meguro is now ready to put everything on the line for her. Collecting his contact info, Tetsuo takes his leave, claiming that he'll be in touch very soon. Later falling asleep at the health center, Meguro wakes up to find Mawaru in a much better state. Wanting her to stay as healthy as possible during this crucial time, the brother makes sure she stays in bed. Sharing a quiet moment together, Meguro is determined to keep her safe. With her 7th birthday arriving the following day, Mawaru was asked what kind of present she'd like. Denying any gifts, the girl is simply grateful to have her brother by her side. Crushed by this answer, Meguro runs out of the room, sad that he's not able to take her place. Suddenly, the man's phone rings, with Tetsuo on the other line. Briefly prepping him, the shady man sends in his associates to retrieve the game's newest participant. Coming out into the hall, Mawaru finds her brother being dragged away, getting stopped before she can chase after him. Promising to explain things to her later, the man is forced to leave his confused sibling behind. Brought into a nearby vehicle, Meguro is soon reunited with Tetsuo. While friendly at first, it doesn't take long before the extortionist drops the facade. Grinning menacingly, it seems that things aren't as straightforward as Meguru thought. Without even realizing it, the older brother played right into Tetsuo's hand. Apparently, he had visited Mawaru's doctor previously with a bribe to temporarily knock her out, explaining why the sister had no recollection of a supposed seizure. Furious at being tricked, Meguru can do little to fight back now that he's trapped. Wishing him well with his financial endeavors, Tetsuo kicks the man out of the car. Forced to put on a blindfold, Meguru is relocated to another area. Taking it off, he joins a group of 9 other people in the same situation as him. As he gets his bearings, the Game Master makes a flashy appearance, going by the name Black Tapia. Eager to start the festivities, the odd character in front of everyone explains the rules. The ultimate goal of the Nightmare game is to survive in this location for a total of 10 days. The main obstacle keeping them from reaching that lies in the new bracelets they're forced to wear. These devices keep tabs on the players at all times, containing a special poison that activates when a person's pulse rate gets too high. In the interest of fairness, each bracelet has been adjusted according to personal medical records. The next hurdle to overcome involves rolling a special kind of dice every day. Various human senses are painted on the sides, and depending on what lands face up, that sense is temporarily removed from the player in question. Each loss has its own shortcomings, with some being far worse than others. However, if the spirit sense is rolled, nothing changes. Additionally, if spirit comes up after having a sense restricted, that lost sense is restored. Conversely, if you roll a sense that has already been removed, nothing will happen. Unfortunately, multiple senses can be stacked, leaving your mental state in a very dangerous situation. In order to maintain stability during play, the bracelets are deactivated while dice are being rolled. Moving on to the money portion, each player automatically receives 50 million yen, with the exception of 3 important stipulations. Firstly, if a person dies, their money is split with the remaining participants. Secondly, a maximum of 5 people are allowed to be killed. Either the 10-day schedule or the death limit can end the game, depending on which happens first. The final catch is that physical violence of any kind is expressly forbidden. Touring the interconnected surroundings, there isn't much to the secretive building. The main area in the middle is the salon, where the dice games will be held daily. In the 4 corners are the recreational rooms meant for entertainment. Adjacent to the salon, everyone finds the rooms assigned to them for the duration of the game. Containing moderately furnished interiors and local phone lines, players will be somewhat comfortable outside of personal handicaps. While everyone worries about food, Tapia declares that it's in the process of being acquired. With the master's explanation out of the way, the game can finally commence. Gathering around the table, the first dice roll starts. First up is Aoshi Iori, who safely gets by with a spirit roll. Next is Daisuke Amazono, landing the slight misfortune of losing taste. Takuo Ishimakura is third in line, managing only a small inconvenience rolling smell. Following him is Fuyumi Utsuromiya, receiving the same results as Ishimakura. Momoko Kukuri is the next player to roll, and unfortunately, is the first person to lose the major sense of sight. After her is Romero Shirakogawa, getting lucky with a spirit roll. Akira Nico then steps up, passing with the minor loss of smell. Miko Nekomachi throws her dice, avoiding danger with a spirit roll. Meguru finally gets his turn, also landing a very fortunate spirit throw. Finishing with Yosuke Makabe, his roll nets him the medium tier loss of hearing. With the first dice game finished, everyone is left a little time to collect themselves before the real game starts. Remembering the state of Kukuri, Meguru wants to help the woman if he can. This may be easier said than done, as she immediately freaks out hearing someone next to her. Apologizing for her actions, she's grateful for the salon bracelet rule being active. Talking with her for a bit, Meguru learns that Kukuri is also not a fan of gambling. Asked why she joined the game, the woman states that she's roughly 9 million yen in the red. Sadly, this isn't her fault, but her father's. The older man held a high position, losing himself to the money he threw away recklessly. Later taking his life, he left his daughter with the responsibility of paying it back. Sketchy collectors then forced her into the game to fulfill their selfish payment conditions. Telling her about his own situation, Meguro encourages Kukuri to stay positive while they support each other. Exchanging proper introductions, the two head back to their rooms for the time being. Shortly after, an announcement is made stating that 10 days worth of food has been placed in the art room. Expecting a peaceful gathering, the duo is met with the exact opposite scenario. Arriving early, Ishimakura has claimed all of the provisions for himself. Only really being enough for 2 people, he decides dividing it up is pointless. Nekomachi attempts to take it back, but thanks to the no violence rule, Ishimakura is currently untouchable. Nico attempts to look at the situation positively, but the thief knows that fasting for 10 days would put anyone under a tremendous amount of stress. Questioned by Meguro about his pledge to work together, Ishimakura simply bluffed his way through the agreement. Using the food as a bargaining chip, the new kingpin is willing to negotiate in exchange for additional prize money. The players aren't sure what to do, watching Ishimakura take his leave. At least, that's what he'd like to do. But someone else is blocking the exit. Unfazed by his antics, Iori remains firmly planted in front of the antagonist. Looking for a different door, Shirakogawa cuts off his escape. With both ways out now sealed, the thief is forced to deal with his own restrictions of the rule he took advantage of. Iori then makes a declaration in regards to killing the one causing trouble. While regular force isn't allowed, another form of attack is already taking place. Thanks to the bracelets, mental damage has become a perfectly viable option. Tired of dealing with the one complicating things, various people start intimidating the man with various insults. As harsh words surround him, Ishimakura attempts to cover his ears, only for the game master to inform him that protecting a sense is grounds for disqualification. Thanks to this news, the others continue pushing the thief to his limit. Meguro is shocked at the drastic turn of events, making an attempt to stop the harassment. This interjection makes him the new target of their rage, being accused of defending the man to get on his good side. As the arguments continue, Iori decides to jump in with a crushing blow. Being asked about his supposed traumatic past, Ishimakura's reaction gives him away. Mentioning a tick he noticed during the dice game, Iori reveals himself to be a very dangerous individual here. Regathering everyone's attention, he initiates a chant that the others quickly join in on. Meguro again tries to prevent the abuse, but not having any influence, there isn't much that can be done. Trying to reason with Ishimakura, it's too late, as he's been dragged back to the memories of his past. One by one, the mental scars reopen, forcing the man to relive the awful moments. Frozen in time, the thief is brought to his knees, with food being the last thing on his mind now. In light of this development, the rations are taken back and passed out evenly. Approaching the defeated man, Meguro attempts to check on him with a shoulder pat, but Ishimakura is already too far gone. Unable to deal with the intense emotions, Ishimakura erupts into a fit of screaming. Within moments, the bracelet's poison takes effect, and the only thing Meguro can do is watch. With the figure in front of them now reduced to a corpse, the nightmare game has claimed its first victim. As the group processes what just took place, the former player is carried away like nothing happened. While Meguro doesn't want his food after the gruesome event, Iori convinces them not to be hypocritical about the matter. Realizing how late it is, everyone decides to head back to their rooms for the time being. Potentially feeling remorse over what took place, Utsunomiya makes a request to team up with Meguro before leaving. The final 2 players clear out, but Kukuri is too scared to be alone, so the pair decide to share a room. Talking about the morality of the game they're involved with, Meguro recalls an experiment with a similar theme. While the situations are different, they share the same aspect of participants using psychological damage rather than physical abuse. Thinking more on this, the duo's train of thought is interrupted by a chime at the door. Checking the nearby monitor screen, Meguro finds Shirakogawa outside, wanting to make amends for earlier. The gullible man lets him inside, dropping his guard at the worst time. Asked about the stereo he's carrying, Shirakogawa thought some gentle music might help ease Kukuri's nerves a bit. However, upon turning it on, the pair is met with a barrage of heavy metal. While others might be fine with this particular genre, the same can't be said for the easily frightened woman. Blocking the door, the opportunist plans to wear the two down with a personal concert. Meguru claims the man will be targeted for this action, but Shirakogawa states how it'll most likely be too late before anyone bothers to check on them. Accused of selfishly killing for money, the intruder quickly refutes this claim. Wanting to enjoy himself to the fullest, the self-proclaimed sadist intends to enjoy his new lethal playground. Listening to the psycho talk about the grotesque hobby he's grown fond of, Meguru knows he's in a tight spot. He tries to call out to the game master to put a stop to this, but gets informed that Shirakogawa is working within the rules. Retreating to the bathroom in an attempt to dampen the music, the duo hears another strange sound from outside. Planting himself in front of the exit, the sadist forces them to listen as he smashes their food supply. Going on to violate the woman's underwear, Kukuri is dangerously close to losing herself. Having their backs against the wall, the situation is looking hopeless. Thankfully, Meguru manages to come up with a plan, but the execution will require a few hours of patience. Growing bored from a lack of reactions, Shirakogawa opens the bathroom door to find the two players mysteriously absent. Spotting a silhouette behind the shower curtain, the psycho plans to finish them off with a sudden appearance. The man springs his attack, but isn't prepared for what he finds. Meguru blasts the sadist with a stream of cold water, catching him off guard. As he's recovering, Kukuri runs from the corner of the room, using the walls to guide her to the main area's entrance. Unfortunately, she isn't able to open the door in time, resulting in a paralyzing outburst from Shirakogawa. He continues to torment her until Meguru rushes out to get in between them. Witnessing something recently that may have been the cause of the psycho's behavior, Meguru decides to try its luck. Noticing a large number of scars on Shirakogawa's body, Meguru correctly identifies them as a remainder of childhood abuse. The circumstances have completely flipped as the sadist has the trauma of his past flood back into his mind. Losing himself in despair, this gives Kukuri the opportunity to finally break away for help. Meguru tells the man to give up, as he'll be found out shortly. Despite these less opportune conditions, Shirakogawa has another option to exploit. Flipping the light switch off, the psycho pulls out a hidden knife, charging straight for Meguru. Hitting his target, the sadist turns things around in an instant. Kukuri desperately rings the bell of the neighboring room, but Shirakogawa quickly catches up with her. Thankfully, it seems he's too preoccupied with his earlier victory to care about the panicking woman. It turns out that Utsunomiya is in the adjacent room, rapidly being filled in on what's happened. The two rush back, only to find Meguru face down on the floor. Telling them about the knife, the man was unfortunately the victim of a technicality. Jumping onto the scene, the game master informs the three players that despite the lack of visibility, their advanced cameras still caught everything. However, without physical proof, Shirakogawa can't be tied to the crime. Luckily, lower accuracy in the darkness resulted in Meguru's wound being relatively shallow. Patching the man up, the admin mentions that he graciously disabled the system during this event, as it was outside of the game's parameters. Taking his leave, Black Tapia later announces that security will be further enhanced to prevent future blind spots. Gathering up the other players, the two victims explain the previous occurrence. In order to build more trust, Iori suggests getting more familiar with everyone, as well as discuss the circumstances that brought them here. Some people are open about themselves, while others decide to remain silent on the topic. Circling back to the issue of Shirakogawa, Iori wants to punish the attacker for his actions. In order for the game to progress more smoothly, he thinks administering discipline will help to maintain stability. A few players aren't in favor of the previous approach used with Ishimakura, so Iori submits another idea that will get the message across. The next morning, Shirakogawa casually leaves his room with a bright smile. Running into Nekomachi, he greets the woman coming down the hall. The warm words are met with complete indifference as she coldly walks past the man. Shirakogawa is shocked by this, but rationalizes that everyone must be under a lot of stress. Peeking into the music room, he notices all the players have gathered together, including Meguru. In an attempt to confront his growing anxiety, he boldly charges in with a friendly attitude. The unexpected outcome is a silent rejection aimed straight at him. Making things worse, the group collectively returns to their activities without a second thought. This does considerable damage to the sadist, who quickly runs away out of fear. The other players relax for the time being, eventually bringing them to the next stage of the dice game. Hoping for decent luck, the group lines up to decide their fate. Iori kicks things off, safely rolling another spirit. Amazono is up next, and with his own dice landing on spirit, he's able to remove the restrictive face mask. Utsuromiya is third to roll, but the good fortune doesn't follow, with her dice landing on the worst possible sense. Flashing a sinister grin, the master is ready to inject the paralyzing anesthesia. The effect is nearly instant, rendering the player's body completely useless. Strapped to a wheelchair, Utsuromiya is given a keeper to help with daily necessities. Understandably panicked at first, she's calmed down by Meguru, who promises to keep her safe. Resuming the dice game, Kukuri is up next, stacking loss of smell onto her lack of vision. Shirakogawa then steps up, devastated at his roll landing on sight. Following him, Nekomachi throws the dice, having her mouth sealed as a result. Nico takes his turn, only to follow in the woman's footsteps. Meguru finally rolls again, but even he can't escape a major loss. Forced to put on the eye mask, his world is immediately enveloped by darkness. Thanks to this, his survival has gotten more complicated. Makabe finishes things up, landing a spirit roll to remove his soundproof headphones. As most players leave with new handicaps, Meguru's current state begins to make him worried. Forgetting his earlier words, the man gets reminded by Utsuromiya that working together will keep them out of harm's way. Then again, the same can't be said for Shirakogawa, left alone to suffer by the others. Bringing Utsuromiya back to her room, Meguru and Kukuri carefully lay the paralyzed player onto the bed. Attempting to help with changing into newer clothes, Kukuri is met with an intense rejection. Apologizing for being too forward, Utsuromiya stops her, deciding to reveal a certain secret to the two of them. Unexpectedly, the woman in front of them is actually a man. Having a female mindset, the player intends to use the prize money to aid with a sexual transition. Meguru questions if it's worth risking her life, met with a response that it very much is. Explaining past events, Utsuromiya hopes to shed some light on what led to this decision. Due to her appearance being coupled with the misunderstood gender identity, the player's childhood was very difficult. It also didn't help that her father constantly added additional pressure. Spending time alone at a riverbank, she eventually discovered a stray dog that accepted her for who she was. The other two note how the doll Utsuromiya carries around shares the same name as the pet. The reason for this is to preserve the memory of the real Chappie, as it didn't take long for a terrible event to happen. Returning to the riverbank on a different day, Utsuromiya found a lone red backpack waiting for her in the grass. In actuality, it was a black backpack that had been stained red with the remains of Chappie. It's anyone's guess as to who is responsible for the cruel act. Regardless, someone was resentful enough to steal her comfort away. Ever since, Utsuromiya has been struggling against the urge to leave everything behind, hoping that the operation can present a more positive outlook on life. Beginning to lose her resolve, the bedridden player is now willing to die for the other two. Not entertaining the idea at all, Meguru is fiercely opposed to the request. Relaying his own struggles, the man states how his sister's dream of living normally makes him want to support her. With words of encouragement, Meguru is confident that Utsuromiya can realize her own aspirations. Leaving it at that for now, the duo locks the door behind them, returning to their own room for the night. The next morning, the trio heads to the music room to see if another gathering is being held. However, upon opening the door, they find that the surroundings have been trashed. Curious about the other areas, the group decides to check on the remaining public spaces. Oddly, all of them are in a similar state. Now in the movie screening room, Utsuromiya notices a colorful present sitting untouched amid the mess. Meguru opens it for her to look inside, resulting in an awful discovery being made. Describing the contents, the box contains a fresh collection of gory articles. 2 hands, 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose, and a tongue. Calling the participants together for a meeting, 2 members are noticeably missing. It's questioned whether Shirakugawa is the culprit, but currently being blind, it's unlikely that he's responsible for the brutal gift. Needing more info, everyone decides to check on the other absent player, Nekomachi. Finding the door unlocked, they walk in to discover the owner of the packaged body parts. Understandably, everyone is shaken by the gruesome display. Looking closer, it seems that Nekomachi had died before the torture started, sparing her the additional pain at the very least. Checking the severed hands, Iori notices a bruise on the back of one. The mark in question is indicative of food purging, and with Nekomachi being a model, this could very well have been a regular occurrence for her. Assuming the killer noticed this, they may have used it to corner the woman mentally. Makabe then notices a note stuffed into the corpse's mouth, revealing a seemingly unrelated message. Exiting the room, the group has their alibis verified, leaving 4 people who could have committed the murder. Amazono immediately becomes suspicious of Iori, as he's been antagonistic from the start. He also quickly gathered information, being the one to inquire about everyone's reason for joining the game. Furthermore, the position he made for himself almost seems too convenient, being a supposed psychiatrist to draw suspicion elsewhere. With all of this stacked against him, Iori becomes far more tense. He snaps back by revealing a certain habit Amazono has of covering his wrist. Wanting to see underneath his wristband, the aggressive man apparently strikes a nerve, possibly insinuating that the covering relates to self-abuse or instability of some kind. Meguru tries to stop him, but gets told not to interfere. Going on the offensive, he tells Iori that aiming for another mental weakness will only serve to unite everyone against him. Reversing the accusation, he claims that Meguru is the most suspicious person present, cross-examining the saintly motivation he carries. Stating how the success rate of the surgery is very low, there's no point in trying even if the circumstances were real. Being asked if he tried a fundraiser, Meguru mentions the previous one he was involved with stealing all the money. Iori doesn't buy the story, blaming Meguru for losing other people's hard-earned cash in a way that's too impossible to believe. He then goes on a rapid-fire assault, saying that the entire medical process is too risky and too valuable for any one person, that no one should bother with someone so unfortunate, that pushing the blame for the sake of personal heroics is unforgivable, and that Meguru's entire life is basically worthless in pursuing this goal. The non-stop attacks chip away at the recipient's reason, leaving him nothing to counter back with. As his heart rate spikes, the game master watches closely as another player heads to their demise. That is, until Kukuri interjects. Preventing further abuse while calming Meguru down, the man narrowly dodges leaving the game. Being confronted on his actions, Iori apologizes for escalating things by lashing out. This time, Makabe speaks up, seeing through the clever man's antics. The others also don't fall for the act, resulting in Iori losing some of his precious reputation. The man is ready to deliver more mental attacks in retaliation, but another outburst from Kukuri puts a stop to more potential damage. Meguru manages to come back to his senses, but is now far more discouraged. Utsuromiya doesn't want him to give up on his dream, but Meguru is lacking in resolve from having his ignorant optimism shoved in his face. Heading back to his room alone, the others follow suit. Despite wanting to think positively, Meguru is now trapped in a negative cycle. His efforts to save his sister were noble, but he now sees them as a means of ugly self-satisfaction. Breaking down, the man just wants life to not be so hard to deal with in general. Being hit with a cruel realization, Meguru now wants to end it all. Having just missed a game-ending death, his current mental state is pushing him back towards the edge. Elsewhere, Kukuri is talking with Utsuromiya, hoping Meguru is managing fine by himself. Bringing up the previous encounter with the group, Utsuromiya understands where Iori is coming from, in the sense that humans are inherently selfish. The concept of supporting others is admirable, but in practice can be incredibly hard for a lot of people. She encourages Kukuri to stay by Meguru's side, as she's the only one that can help him now. Back in the man's room, both adults quietly sit together, not sure what should be said in this situation. Breaking the silence, Kukuri offers to listen to whatever's on Meguru's mind. In response, the man opens up about his family life, recalling his time as a young boy. Mostly taken care of by his mother, Meguru got used to a childhood with a single parent. Desperate for the money to afford his sister's heart transplant, the excessive work led the caretaker to an early death. Meguru then quit school to take care of the younger sibling, struggling with the burden for years. Having blamed his parents while stuck working himself, he feels that he's a bad person, but Kukuri is understanding about the matter. Confused about why, Meguru simply accepts the kindness being shown to him. Despite being surrounded by despair, the pair finally manages to laugh after hearing a stomach growl from Kukuri. With the mood now lightened, Meguru feels bad about before, wanting to visit Utsunomiya to make amends. As the two talk a bit more before heading to her room, the other player is currently in the middle of a nap. Everything is peaceful until a loud noise wakes her up. Becoming slightly nervous, Utsunomiya calls out to the mystery person that interrupted her sleep. Along the side of the bed, Chappie rises up to greet the player. Unfortunately, the doll is being controlled by a strange new person with sinister intentions. Screaming at the sudden appearance, Utsunomiya manages to maintain herself, knowing the goal of the intruder. As the stranger turns on a children's song, they slowly work their way closer to the bed, brandishing a pair of scissors. Jumping on top of her, the attacker stabs with the weapon multiple times. Aiming slightly to the left, the mysterious figure smashes Chappie to pieces. Unable to move, Utsunomiya then has her clothing shredded. Placed in her wheelchair and brought to a mirror, the player is about to have another piece of her identity tarnished. Calling out to the game master, Utsunomiya claims this to be violence, but since you can't feel pain from having your hair cut, Tapia doesn't count the act as offensive. She then tries calling for her handler, but gets informed that they aren't allowed to interfere with the affairs of players. Completely defenseless, Utsunomiya is forced to confront the painful reality stemming from her childhood. Suffering alone within the soundproof room, the woman falls into the shadows of her mind. Outside, the pair of blind players make their way back to Utsunomiya's room. Opening the door with a keycard, a loud noise causes the duo to freeze where they are. With the disturbance being impossible for the paralyzed woman to cause, Meguru wonders why the only other person that should be there isn't talking. Suddenly, a figure darts past them out of the room, confirming the man's suspicions. Meguru clumsily chases the intruder into the hall, but being unable to see anything, quickly loses any trace of the former occupant. Meanwhile, Kukuri makes her way deeper inside, surrounded by nothing but darkness. Feeling her way through the room, it doesn't take long before she locates the silent player. Hearing Kukuri scream out, Meguru comes back to the room, discovering the reality of the situation. With both players blaming themselves, Meguru laments the fact that they were unable to prevent the previous deaths. Not wanting to let the culprit win, the man wants to find them now more than ever. The others gather once again, being filled in on the tragic death of Utsunomiya. Going over the fresh details of the crime, Meguru beats himself up over his own issues preventing the player's protection. Everyone offers to continue searching for the killer, but Meguru refuses the help, knowing it'll only cause them to doubt each other more. Further proving this is the fact that Kukuri stayed behind, not wanting to get involved with the situation any longer. Done caring about the rest of them, the man chooses to go on the defensive, knowing the killer is somewhere in front of him. Being pushed away, the rest of the players decide to leave Meguru alone for the time being. Frustrated with everything, the man remains on the floor of Utsunomiya's room. As he remains kneeled, a mysterious figure appears behind him. Eyeing the keycard to Kukuri's room, the figure carefully reaches down, sliding it out of Meguru's back pocket, pulling it towards him. The trap has been sprung. Marveling at his successful act, Meguru has revealed the killer. Plotting this approximately 5 hours earlier, the pair of blind players took precautions that paid off. Thinking about what led to Utsunomiya's death, it's likely that the killer slipped into the room after Kukuri left. This means that the killer had already planned to target the paralyzed player from the start, camping out for the chance to do so. If this information comes to light, then the trail will go cold, as the attacker won't do anything hasty. Then again, Meguru rationalizes that it might be better to alert everyone, forcing the murderer to make a move. Setting a trap with their room key, he wants to see if the killer will attempt to steal it in order to finish his work. Kukuri would effectively be a decoy, as she's the easiest target to come after now. This plan needs to work, because if Kukuri dies, the others would only need to gang up on one more person to end the game. Not having any more allies at that point, Meguru would most likely be the final sacrifice. Asked what he plans to do with the culprit after discovering them, Meguru confidently says that he'll finish them off. Kukuri doesn't want an act of vengeance, preferring any other option than what he's proposing. Facing the issue head-on, the man knows that things will only get worse if they show mercy. Declaring his intentions just, Meguru's conviction is unwavering. Knowing they can only judge themselves here, he's willing to bear this burden for those still living, as well as the deceased. Thanks to his determination, Meguru is able to catch the killer red-handed. Calling back to the others, the man waits to hear the identity of the would-be thief. Within moments, everyone is shocked to see that Nico is the one behind everything. Meguru angrily demands answers, so the culprit writes messages in a sketchbook for Iori to read out. Not remorseful in the slightest, Nico claims to have been playing the game as intended. With Meguru continuing his moral tirade, the murderer considers his death threats to be hypocritical. As Nico goes on to describe the gruesome details of Utsunomiya's passing, Meguru makes a mad dash towards him, with Amazono grabbing him before the man makes a costly mistake. Telling the killer to die over and over, he's now met with silence, as Nico drops his means of communication. This leaves the rest of them in a tricky spot, as no one knows anything about who he truly is. Even Iori is unable to analyze him, as Nico deceived them with a completely different personality. With nothing left to be accomplished, Meguru heads back to fill Kukuri in on their dangerous new situation. Shortly after these events, everyone gathers in the salon for the third dice game. As the room fills with tension, the rolls commence. Iori steps up first, shocking the group with an awful first roll. Unlike Utsunomiya, the man takes it in stride, willing to cooperate peacefully. Amazono follows up with a far luckier roll, only dealing with the loss of smell. Kukuri throws her dice, receiving the best luck so far by landing on spirit. Finally able to remove her blindfold, the woman can see the wide range of emotions all around her. Shirakogawa takes his turn next, getting a very unfortunate roll that stacks paralysis onto his lack of sight. Nico makes his way up, rolling the dice to land on spirit. Removing his face mask with a grin, the murderer taunts Meguru as he leaves the table. Hoping for a miracle, Meguru waits for the results of his throw, only to learn that he once again landed on sight. Makabe makes the final toss, only to land an additional sight roll for himself. Finishing up the round, the killer takes his leave, free to do as he pleases with no restrictions now. Retiring for the night, Meguru and Kukuri return to their room to get some sleep. However, one of them has plans of their own. Using the nearby phone line, Meguru calls a certain someone to issue a challenge. Before he can leave, the man gets caught by Kukuri, who overheard the conversation. Knowing what he's trying to do, the woman declares her love for him, begging him to stay. The two share a kiss, but the outcome is still the same, with Meguru determined to finish things once and for all. Making a promise to come back safe, the man wants Kukuri to stay in the room for the time being. Sharing one last kiss, Meguru heads off to the appointment he made. The two men arrive, ready for their final confrontation to begin. One will remain alive, and the other will die. Nico wonders exactly what it is that Meguru is planning with this call-out, being met with a violent declaration. Not buying it, the killer is still grateful that his target willingly came out of hiding. Even though Meguru is told that he could easily die at any time, he isn't shaken. Setting aside the earlier hopelessness he felt in regards to his sister's operation, Meguru has now come to terms with the goal he's fighting for. Rather than helping or abandoning, Nico offers a third choice that could potentially be more appealing for the brother putting on a tough act. However, when Meguru asks if suffering is actually bad, Nico becomes visibly confused. Mentioning a metaphorical pendulum of emotions, Meguru knows that despite the torment he now feels, things are bound to swing back the other way eventually. Comparing this to the principles of yin and yang, Nico agrees that just about everything comes back in a loop. Following with a bold declaration, he argues that pleasure and suffering don't follow the same rules. Wondering if this is true, Meguru brings up the words that were found on the strange note in the late Nekomachi's mouth. Rationalizing that the phrase has religious connotations, he thinks back to Nico's enthusiasm towards praying to God for luck. Outed as a religious fanatic, Nico shows how the game they're playing relates heavily to Buddhism. When asked about the seventh road that lies ahead, Meguru is told that nirvana waits for those that discard their desires. Questioned why it's so imperative to reach that stage, Nico emphasizes the importance of escaping the endless cycle of despair known as life. Meguru then poses a question in regards to the killer's actions going against the religion he's a part of. Not viewing his actions as murder, Nico is convinced that he did a good thing by releasing the victims from the same suffering. Meguru then becomes aware of a shady group that Nico is a part of, being lost to the promise of salvation in exchange for winning the game. The fanatic argues against this, saying religion freed him from what holds everyone else down, not believing in love, peace, freedom, or equality. Nico is convinced that any form of justice is a farce. Meguru continues to believe that Nico is being used by his organization, taking advantage of his desperation for a meaning to life. As the killer reveals himself to be a nihilist, Meguru tells him that his shaky beliefs are the real reason for his suffering. Claiming to hate society for turning a blind eye to all of its problems, the true nihilist knows that the cycle of self-destruction can't be stopped. Asking Nico if he understands, Meguru tells him that the outcome of his actions can only lead to one place. With his religious group being reduced to an ineffective coping mechanism, the murderer is forced to accept the blood on his hands. Furious, Nico asks Meguru if he has any idea about the experiences he was forced to endure, and without flinching, Meguru responds in kind. Losing his cool, Nico tries to run, but thanks to Kukuri's efforts, the room is blocked off. Closing in, Meguru continues his verbal assault, eventually telling his opponent to die, as his life is just a cycle of pain. As the killer's emotions begin spiraling out of control, he thinks back to his adolescence. Being surrounded by worthless adults, Nico was forced to rely solely on himself. He wanted to be an artist, but due to health problems that ran in his family, he was unable to overcome the fatigue that held back his improvement. Becoming a class clown, he wasn't teased in school, but got stuck with constant failure that couldn't be shaken off. Seemingly stuck in limbo, he moved through each day as a zombie. One day, a certain religious individual came to him offering the chance to start over, enticing the discouraged artist. The acceptance was certainly helpful, but in the end, his pain never left. Unable to escape the non-stop rain of recurring and impending medical issues, Nico became suffocated by despair. The endless stream of suffering washed him away, until nothing was left. Coming back to the present, Meguru is left standing as the lone victor. Alone with his thoughts, he starts to wonder if this was the right course of action. Part of this is because of Nico's personal circumstances, but his mention of being an accomplice also raises more questions. Finding himself returning to his downward spiral, Meguru isn't sure what to think anymore. Following this, Meguru gathers the players to discuss the battle that took place moments ago. With only one person left to be killed before the game ends early, it's suggested by the others that Shirakugawa should be the one to die for his previous actions. Thinking that he might have a dual personality, Iori isn't sure he wants to kill someone dealing with that. Amazono is against trying to gain Shirakugawa's trust, cynically stating how it's an easy way to get backstabbed in this scenario. Knowing he doesn't care about money, Amazono would rather take advantage of the outcast's mental state to extort cash from him. Being asked his opinion on the matter, Meguru states that he's fine with whatever is decided, unable to make a proper choice. Not amused with his lack of involvement, Iori tells him to be the sacrifice, but Meguru knew things would come to this. With only a single player standing between them and the finale, a conclusion would naturally be rushed, but the man reminds them that this isn't supposed to be a killing game. While there was always incentive for murder, the priority was meant to be self-preservation. The others continue to argue about the right course of action, leaving Meguru at a loss. While his sister's well-being hangs in the balance, he continues to wonder if taking someone's life in exchange for hers is valid. With the players' different opinions resulting in a deadlock, their time for making a decision eventually runs out. Following this, the group gathers back in the salon for the fourth dice game. Hearing the news that 4 players have died, Shirakugawa desperately pleads with the others for help, continuing to be met with silence. With no additional interruptions, the remaining participants make their way to the table. Being unable to roll, Iori's handler does it for him, adding a loss of smell to his paralysis. Amazono steps up next, regaining the mouth gag he discarded previously. Kukuri rolls her dice, managing a light loss of smell. Shirakugawa's handler stands in for him, not doing the man any favors with a repeat sight roll. Meguru then moves to the table, knowing how important the outcome of this round is. Throwing the dice, the blind player lands on another major sense. Terrified by this result, Meguru's hope quickly starts to fade. Makabe finishes the round, rolling a manageable loss of taste. With the event concluded, everyone begins to make their way out of the room. Stunned, Meguru stands motionless, completely isolated inside of his own world. Thankfully, Kukuri continues to stay by his side to guide him. While he's grateful, Meguru knows how powerless his current state leaves him, unsure of what to expect. In an attempt to reassure the man, Kukuri starts to write words into the palm of his hand. Getting her message across, the woman remains Meguru's light within the darkness. Returning to their room, the 2 players manage to fall asleep. Trapped in a nightmare, Meguru is tormented by apparitions of Iori and Nico. As his conscience splits off into a dark mirror of his thoughts, he starts to become less sure of himself. Haunted by twisted imagery of the other players, Meguru jolts awake. Painfully aware of his helpless situation, the man starts to lose himself to despair. Becoming aware of her lover's torment, Kukuri does her best to comfort him. Using her arm, Meguru writes an apology for being weak, but Kukuri is still determined to be with him regardless. Despite wanting to stay together after the game is finished, the man isn't sure he'll even make it that far. Kukuri goes on to talk about the future, encouraging him to hold on for all the memories yet to be shared. Meguru has his doubts, but Kukuri holds tightly to the feelings between them, hoping he will too. The sentiment keeps Meguru in check for the time being, but unfortunately for him, there were no deaths this round. With no significant changes among the participants, the nightmare game continues on into consecutive dice rolls. By the 8th day, Meguru has had every single sense cut off, forced to endure his barely functional existence. Kukuri was the only thing keeping him sane, but now unable to feel or touch, he has nothing left. Wondering if he isn't already dead, Meguru wonders what purpose his life holds. Faced with the cruel reality of his circumstances, the man's dark thoughts continue to spiral down further and further. Warped by the merciless aspects of society that everyone is forced to deal with, Meguru is crushed by the limitations. Locked into a routine of self-serving attitudes and uncaring surroundings, there's no escape from the cage of sorrow. His current reality isn't foreign, but rather one he's dealt with all along. Having nothing left to hope for, Meguru is done. The darkness of his mind takes over, finally relieving him of the pain. Suddenly, the man can hear a group of voices calling out to him. He could throw it all away, but if he does, then nothing will be saved. Even if the light is an illusion, it's still worth chasing after. Pushing himself with everything he's got, Meguru tears himself away from the darkness. Running through the emptiness of his mind, the man refuses to give up. Facing a future full of anguish, he doesn't have to accept it. With his own 2 hands, Meguru can fight against that fate. Following this declaration, an announcement rings out over the speakers. The Game Master confirms the final death, bringing the nightmare game to a close. Telling the players to remove their restraints, it seems that Meguru is still alive. Returning to the salon, Meguru is the first one to arrive. Coming through the door shortly after, Amazono is the next person who managed to survive. Walking in behind him, Makabe emerges to claim his well-earned prize. Focusing on the fourth player to make it out, everyone is shocked to see Shirakogawa step into the room. Meguru gets a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, knowing who that leaves. Watching the final person walk inside, Kukuri reveals herself as the last survivor. However, whatever she went through has left her emotionally drained. Grateful for this outcome, Meguru is still amazed that Iori was the one who didn't make it. The remaining players have their ailments cured, finally able to leave this mysterious place behind. Before heading out, Black Tapia distributes the winnings of the game. Rather pleased with himself, Makabe is ready to leave his former homeless life behind. Shirakogawa is the opposite, still not caring about the money and unsure of what his next move should even be. Amazono quietly takes his cash, wishing Meguru good luck with his sister's operation. Receiving her prize, Kukuri is also given Meguru's contact info, with the two planning to meet up again on the outside. While the man intends to keep the promise, his lover seems unsure of herself, leaving without looking back. The game master enthusiastically hands Meguru his money, being met with a piercing glare and some harsh words. Transferred out by another unknown vehicle, Meguru hears a familiar voice coming from the seat across from him. Reunited with Tetsuo, the former player barely has any emotion left to display. Wondering about the true purpose of the game, Meguru is told how the entire production had been viewed as entertainment for certain individuals in the shadows. Messing with the man, Tetsuo claims that he could steal the case of prize money if he wanted to, but wants to be a good sport in his own twisted way. Brandishing his newly acquired nihilism, Meguru leaves the recruiter at a loss for words. Being dropped off soon after, the brother arrives at the hospital where everything started. Rushing to his sister's room, Meguru is ready to see her again for the first time in over a week. Still unaware of what took place, the young girl is cowering behind her bed. Apologizing for his absence, the sister wants to make sure he won't disappear again. While Meguru was forced to reflect on his own hopeless circumstances, Mawaru ended up doing the same. Despite being younger, she became aware of the burden being placed on the other people in her life. Telling her that isn't true, the girl desperately hugs her brother, not wanting to be left alone. Hearing the family member give his life meaning, the color returns to Meguru's eyes, realizing his battle was worth it. Ready to celebrate Mawaru's birthday, the brother has one hell of a present for her. A month later, the two siblings travel overseas to America for the necessary medical procedure. Around 2 months later, a compatible donor is found for the heart transplant. As he continues to wait for new developments, Meguru can't help but think about what Kukuri has been up to since the game. Upset that he hasn't been able to properly repay the woman for the support she gave him, the man's only wish now is to see her again. Lost in his thoughts, Meguru is brought back to reality as a certain someone calls his name. Kukuri was finally able to catch up with him, though because of his sister's operation, Meguru was too preoccupied to notice the woman's calls. It seems she had also been hesitant to see him again, feeling guilty about a previous event. Knowing what's troubling her, Meguru wants to hear about the game's final day. Kukuri isn't sure if it should be brought up, but the man assures her that nothing will change between them, regardless of what took place. Sitting together on a bench, the woman recalls a part of the game that caused a certain chain of events. After Meguru's battle with Nico, the two used his keycard to see if there was any evidence of the aforementioned accomplice. Being blind at the time, the man left it up to Kukuri to search the room for clues. Noticing a small vent, the woman reached inside, managing to discover a few hidden items. Placing them on the bed, Kukuri reported finding a stash of extra food, as well as a different notebook than the one used to communicate previously. When asked if anything was written inside, she lied, saying it was completely empty. Moving to the bathroom, Kukuri secretly looked at Nico's hidden correspondence over the course of the game. One note in particular reveals the information they'd been searching for. The identity of the accomplice was Iori. After the first death of Ishimakura, Nico enlisted Iori's help, as he had shown how capable he was of manipulating others. Making himself a prominent figure within the group, Iori was able to sway things in his favor, including having suspicion pushed away from himself by skillfully interrogating others as a deflection tactic. Confirming the pair's initial suspicions, the final note exchanged between the killers was a plan to execute the two of them. Verifying another piece of the puzzle, Kukuri admits to being the one that took Iori's life. As Meguru continued to lose sensory functions, the woman watched him progressively get weaker. Wanting to support the man who fought for her, Kukuri eventually decided to do the same. Challenging Iori, it didn't matter who ended up dying, as Meguru's life would be saved regardless. Expectedly, the man was able to pin down her way of thinking with little effort. Although this appeared to be effective, Kukuri was fiercely determined to maintain herself. This tolerance allowed for Iori's weakness to come to the surface. With being flawless presenting a number of possible issues for the man, another clue was dropped previously, showing Iori desperate for acknowledgement. Nevertheless, he also held strong, resulting in an extended battle. Mentally draining each other for an unknown period of time, the encounter became burned into Kukuri's mind. The victory left her with doubts, mirroring Meguru's thoughts at the time of Nico's death. Not convinced that her actions were righteous, Kukuri is more distressed at the fact that she actually killed the man for her own self-preservation. Glad she was honest with him, Meguru doesn't judge her, understanding those feelings all too well. Sitting together silently, the two know how badly scarred they are from the experience they were forced into. Being interrupted by a phone call, Meguru is informed that his sister's operation is now underway. Both adults return to the hospital, anxiously waiting in the hall during the procedure. Eventually, a doctor comes out, reporting that they were successful. Now, it's all up to Mawaru's body to accept the heart. The pair sit next to the girl's bed, hoping for the best as she sleeps peacefully. Thankfully, it doesn't take long before the sister wakes up. Questioning her surroundings, the older brother assures her that it's all over now. It was a long struggle, but Mawaru now has her whole life ahead of her. Happily, the trio starts to cry, feeling relief for the first time in a long while. The scene is heartwarming, but another question continues to nag at the back of Meguru's mind. Clawing his way through the negative aspects of life, the darkness continues to eat away at him. However, thanks to the presence of someone genuine, Meguru is able to shed the things dragging him down. Even if his own reason for living isn't exclusive, he still finds purpose in supporting someone else. Moving into the future, both women are now living under the same roof. Greeting the other member of the household, Meguru returns home from work, ready to keep living with his new family. While the series is on the shorter side, Life is Money still manages to explore some very interesting concepts. As far as the structure of the game goes, it's certainly unique in the way that senses are used as a handicap. Being reduced to nothing more than your inner thoughts is quite a scary outcome for bad dice rolls. However, things get tricky in regards to the mental portion of the game. It's hard to determine exactly where the benchmark is for a player to be killed. Being the first victim, Ishimakura showed various signs of stress before meeting his demise. Although his trauma was the cause of death, Shirakogawa had an equally intense moment with his memories, yet managed to stay alive regardless. There are also other instances of fear, anger, and sadness, all of which are relatively severe. These moments seem like they would be enough to trigger the end, but the system in place is never entirely consistent. Granted, you could make the argument that everyone's differing medical records would allow for some leeway. Things become more flexible when you consider that anxiety levels for individual people vary from person to person. The game isn't perfect, but the idea is interesting enough that I'm willing to cut it some slack. Personally, I think the series really shines in the way it presents various forms of moral philosophy. Meguru mentions before going after Nico that they can only judge themselves, as the law doesn't apply in the game. From the start of the competition, ethical decisions are made in accordance with what is deemed socially acceptable. Ishimakura stole everyone's food, so naturally, he's an evil person. Shirakogawa went out of his way to torment certain players, so it makes sense for the others to band against him. Nico killed 2 individuals, so the man can only be seen as a murderer. These are normal conclusions to draw from the situation seen in the manga. Then again, is that really all there is to it? After all, the actions committed were done in a completely closed-off environment made specifically for violence. Think about it this way. In an area secluded from society, normal rules are thrown out the window. If someone disagrees with your way of doing things, you can make them disappear. With an unchallenged opinion, you become the law. While the previously mentioned villains acted in their own interest, the game's rules were in favor of taking the initiative. The same applies to Nico. Ordinarily, his killing wouldn't be excusable no matter the reason. Being given a monetary incentive with virtually no consequences for personal motivation, the whole situation now changes. Even Meguru may have succumbed to the temptation if his senses remained intact during the game's finale. Using his nihilism as a motivator, he could have discarded any remaining morality, as nothing matters anyways. Desperation can potentially bring out a very ugly side of people, and the Nightmare game is full of individuals that need money for something. Regardless of the judgment one might receive for questionable behavior, the one person that truly knows your circumstances is you. Therefore, anything becomes fair play if the price is right. This brings up another key focus, namely, the subjective value of every person. You may think it's cold to even consider this, but there are various real-world applications of this idea. Take the practice of medical triage, for example. In hospitals that don't have proper resources to help everyone, urgency levels are assigned to patients. Depending on the severity, certain people are given aid before others. What do you think happens when multiple people are in the same category? Naturally, a choice needs to be made on who to save first. Not only that, but there are instances when only one person will be able to live. Let's say that a skilled brain surgeon is capable of saving anyone with his talents. One day, a young boy comes in with a serious head injury that needs to be addressed right away. The man gets ready to start, but then gets informed that an important political figure is being brought in after collapsing from an urgent blood clot. A decision must now be made to determine who will survive. There is a correct logical choice, as well as a correct moral choice. Leaving it up to your discretion, what solution is the proper one? Another thought-provoking situation with similar themes is the trolley problem. While the basis for this is fictional, the experiment makes for an interesting moral dilemma. The scenario involves a runaway tram heading down a track that eventually splits off. On one part of the tracks, 5 people are helplessly trapped. The other side of the tracks has a single person. From the outset, nothing is known about these people, but you have control of a switch that can direct the tram to either side. Faced with this choice, who would you end up saving? Logically, it makes more sense to rescue the bigger group. However, additional factors can result in a harder choice. Now let's say, for instance, that the 5 people on the first side are doctors that are beneficial for society. Replacing the nameless person on the other side, the significant other that you adore stands alone. There is no right answer to this, but a decision still needs to be made. With these scenarios in mind, we watch certain characters struggle with similar decisions in the manga. Starting the game, Meguru is completely opposed to killing anyone, wanting the players to get along if possible. He maintains this stance until Utsunomiya is murdered later on. Meguru then considers his actions against Nico justifiable, as he's choosing other lives to protect in exchange for the killers. Taking him out, Meguru feels hypocritical after committing the act of revenge. Nevertheless, another choice had to be made, prioritizing himself over the other man. Kukuri also ended up doing the same thing against Iori. Whether it was for Meguru's sake or hers is irrelevant. The fact is, she snuffed out someone's life to save another. There's also the argument in regards to Mawaru's heart condition. Iori is the one to bring up the fact that it most likely isn't worthwhile to even try helping someone like her. In most cases, any group of people trying to make that decision would be split. Some would want to help out of sympathy, and others would prefer to use the resources elsewhere. While other players may have had better uses of the money, Meguru still chose his sister's life over theirs. Though it's a selfish reason, it makes complete sense for anyone to try saving someone close to them. Coupled with exclusive circumstances, all of us have biases, and those preferences dictate our decision-making. Another element of the manga I think is fascinating is Meguru's gradual shift from optimist to nihilist. When it comes to series like this, there's usually a character that refuses to give in to the despair of the situation. In my own experience, I've never watched that character type lose their enthusiasm in such a realistic and believable way before. Meguru mostly remains himself until about halfway through the story. Right after Nekomachi's death, Iori goes on the offensive, targeting Meguru to keep suspicion away from himself. The debate presented isn't even in relation to the killer's identity, instead questioning the brother's motivations in saving his sister. Throwing out whatever he can as a distraction, Iori's speech is less accusatory than it is disheartening. It's no wonder Meguru's thoughts spiraled afterwards. Dropping out of school early, he was forced to discard everything else for the sake of his sister. Mawaru's life essentially became a proxy for his. Iori didn't just make him aware of his underlying ego, but also made him realize that his ignorant efforts wouldn't have been enough to save the girl. It was an honest mistake, but Meguru has no room for error, harshly chastising himself. Following the death of Utsunomiya, the man is hell-bent on getting revenge, no matter what it takes. Managing to succeed in this, Meguru begins doubting his judgment, further losing his motivation. Regrouping with the other players, the man has now adopted a stance of relativism, bringing him in line with the game's rules. Despite having goals he should be chasing, Meguru is so emotionally numb at this point that he can't even think about what's morally right anymore. Kukuri tries to comfort him with affection, but even this doesn't last for long. Losing all of his senses, Meguru is forced into the depths of nihilism. Cycling through a variety of social issues, the man becomes fully aware that he's just one more cog in the mindless machine. He barely manages to break out of this mental state, but Meguru is now forced to deal with the lingering effects. It's probably not good that I can say this, but I relate heavily to Meguru's psychological journey. For as long as I can remember, nihilistic thoughts have been something I struggle with daily. Much like Meguru, I used to have a decent outlook on life, though somewhere along the line, that started to change. It's amazing how gradual the process can be, but certain aspects of reality can definitely speed things up. One detail in particular that correlates is the need for money. My situation involved chasing a small dream of my own, one that actually parallels Nico. In order for that aspiration to be realized, a sacrifice was necessary. I traded money, food, and sleep in exchange for the chance to pursue something I cared about. With a burning passion, I worked tirelessly for years, while also holding down a regular job. Unfortunately, this is another area that connects me with Meguru's experience. Blindly charging forward, both of us naively expected to be rewarded for our efforts. As some of us know, reality isn't that kind. I had poured an ungodly amount of time into reaching my dream, but it just wasn't meant to be. I remember a very specific point where the despair of my situation hit me all at once. It's crazy to think about, but even this matched up with Meguru. I was lying in bed, forced to confront my circumstances while dreaming. I didn't have much to show for my work, and at this point was almost entirely out of money. I quickly woke up, sitting upright while gathering my thoughts. If I wanted to survive, I would have to start working multiple jobs. This meant that my progress would be completely halted in favor of solely paying rent. My life would be dedicated to non-stop labor for a long period of time, with no real alternatives and no free time to speak of. This realization broke me. I started to wonder what the point of life was if I couldn't achieve the dream that was quickly disappearing. The only thing I could do was cry. That moment happened roughly 4 years ago, and those intense feelings remain burned into my memory. Following that was a depressive downward spiral that solidified my nihilistic beliefs. I'm fully aware that I'm not special or entitled to something just because I put in effort. If anything, I'm just glad that I managed to work past that period to some degree. It was incredibly difficult at times, but those challenges helped turn that destructive nihilism into something more constructive. Initially encountering manga with darker themes and subject matter, I could only approach them with a basic level of understanding. Now, I can empathize with that pain, connecting with series I otherwise wouldn't be able to relate to. Previously, I was far more reserved and shy in the way I presented myself to others. In the present, I have no reservations about being open, honest, and direct with people I speak to. With the mindset of this being my only existence, I'd rather be upfront while talking. There was always a lot of hatred towards my surroundings that supposedly held no meaning. Even if that's the case, the opposite also holds true if I allow it. Choosing what's important for myself, I found more personal meaning within the smaller aspects of life. Chasing fame or money doesn't interest me. I'd rather just be left to my own devices while trying to maintain a healthy mindset. Granted, self-care can be difficult to manage at times, especially when my line of thinking tends to be more negative. Looking at this year as a whole, it doesn't seem like much has changed compared to the previous ones. However, I've made attempts to slowly improve my environment. I see friends more than I used to. I try not to let my thoughts spiral out of control. I'm giving myself proper breaks when I'm exhausted. I chose to forgive myself from before. I also started investing more time into this channel. It's no exaggeration to say that anime is one of the few things still keeping me around. Making these videos has given me something to focus on, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to produce this content. The thing is, this whole channel is a contradiction. If I can't bring myself to care about most aspects of my life, then why am I choosing to work on videos regularly? I thought about it for a while, and the answer also seems to lie within the pages of Life is Money. For a long time now, I felt tied down by an invisible force. Out of all the series I've read, I don't think I've connected with the panel so strongly. Still, what's been happening lately feels like an attempt to tear myself away from that darkness. Like Meguru, I'm desperately running, and I don't know why. It would be easier to give up, but I just can't do it. Even if nothing is waiting for me at the end, I want to believe that something will make this existence worthwhile. It could be tomorrow, or it could be 10 years from now. Either way, I want to hold on, and if making videos is my way of doing that, then so be it. Regardless, despite the perceived notion of what success is, I don't think there's an objectively correct way to proceed in life. It's completely up to you whether you choose to live for yourself or dedicate the time for others. You can chase popularity and material wealth, or you can be satisfied with a simplified routine. You can believe that everything inherently has meaning, or embrace the contradictory nature of life's facade. It's all the same, so take care of yourself, find something you love, and do what feels right for you. My struggle isn't over, but as long as I'm still here, I'll do my best to enjoy the moment.